The smoke coiled through the elevator shaft like a living thing, hungry and black, and Delilah Dawson knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower at 23 years old, clutching a stack of quarterly reports that would never be filed. She pressed her back against the wall of the conference room, watching the flames lick beneath the door, feeling the heat radiating through the wood. The fire alarm had stopped its shrill scream 10 minutes ago, which meant the power was gone, which meant the sprinkler system had failed, which meant she was completely and utterly alone. Everyone else had evacuated during the drill, or what she'd thought was a drill, until she'd smelled the smoke and heard the genuine terror in the voices echoing through the stairwell before the door jammed shut behind her. Her phone was dead. The windows didn't open in these modern architectural marvels. The fire escape door was blocked by debris from whatever explosion had started this nightmare. She'd tried everything, screamed until her throat was raw, beaten her fists bloody against the reinforced glass. Now she stood in the corner farthest from the advancing smoke, trying to remember prayers her grandmother had taught her, trying not to think about how much burning hurt, trying to be brave even though no one would ever know whether she'd been brave or not. The door burst open in a shower of splinters and flame. Delilah screamed, throwing her arms up to shield her face from the blast of heat that roared into the room. Through her fingers, she saw something impossible stepping through the inferno, a figure wreathed in fire that didn't burn him, flames that parted around his body like water around stone. He was tall, impossibly tall, and his skin was as pale as moonlight on snow. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of pure white that somehow remained untouched by the smoke and ash. His eyes found hers across the burning room, and they were the color of fresh blood, glowing with an inner light that had nothing to do with the fire surrounding them. "You," he said, and his voice cut through the roar of the flames like a blade through silk. "Come here. Now." Delilah couldn't move. Her brain refused to process what she was seeing, refused to accept that someone was walking through fire like it was morning mist, that his skin wasn't blistering and blackening, that he was staring at her with eyes no human being had ever possessed. He crossed the room in 3 strides, moving faster than anything she'd ever seen, and then his hands were on her shoulders and she was being lifted like she weighed nothing at all. His skin was cool against hers, impossibly cool despite the hellish heat surrounding them, and she found herself pressed against a chest that didn't rise and fall with breath. "Close your eyes," he commanded, his accent strange and old-fashioned, each word precisely articulated. "Do not open them until I tell you. Do you understand?" "What are you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from smoke. His arms tightened around her, one beneath her knees and one supporting her back, cradling her against his body. "I am Vaelith Qadir," he said, as if that explained everything. "I am the vampire king of the Eastern Dominion, and I have not walked through fire in 300 years. You will close your eyes now, Delilah Dawson, because I will not have you damaged by what comes next." She wanted to ask how he knew her name, wanted to ask why a vampire king was saving her from a burning building, wanted to ask if she was already dead and hallucinating her final moments. Instead, she pressed her face into his shoulder and squeezed her eyes shut as the world exploded into heat and motion around her. She felt him moving, felt the flames licking at her clothes and hair, felt the smoke trying to force its way into her lungs. But his body shielded her from the worst of it, his arms like iron bars keeping her protected against his chest. He moved through the fire as if it were nothing, as if the collapsing building and the superheated air and the toxic smoke were merely minor inconveniences. Then there was a sensation of falling, of wind rushing past her face, and the heat began to recede. She kept her eyes closed like he'd commanded, not understanding why, but trusting that strange, authoritative voice more than she trusted her own instincts. When they finally stopped moving, the air was cool and clean and smelled of rain. She felt herself being set down on solid ground, felt his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Open your eyes," Vaelith said. They were standing in an alley 3 blocks from the Meridian Tower. She could see the building in the distance, flames shooting from the upper floors, smoke billowing into the evening sky. Fire trucks surrounded it, their lights painting the street in red and blue. People were everywhere, crowds being held back by police barriers, news cameras documenting the disaster. She looked up at the man who had carried her through an inferno without getting a single burn. His white hair was pristine. His clothing, a black suit that looked like it cost more than her yearly salary, was unmarked by soot or ash. But his hands, she noticed, were blistered and raw, the pale skin cracked and weeping clear fluid that definitely wasn't blood. "Your hands," she said, reaching for them without thinking. He pulled away from her touch, tucking his damaged hands behind his back. "They will heal before morning," he said dismissively. "You are unharmed?" Delilah looked down at herself. Her clothes were singed, holes burned through her blazer and skirt. Her arms were red and tender, minor burns that would blister later. But considering she'd just been carried through what looked like a scene from hell itself, she was remarkably intact. "I'm alive," she said, which seemed like the most important point. Then the reality of the situation hit her, and her knees buckled. Oh God, I almost died. I was going to die up there, and you walked through fire." Vaelith caught her before she hit the ground, steadying her with those cool, strong hands. "You will not collapse now," he said firmly. "You survived. You are strong. You will remain standing." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command, spoken with the kind of absolute authority that made her spine straighten automatically. She took a deep breath, then another, forcing the panic down. "How did you know I was up there?" she asked. "How did you find me?" Something flickered across his perfect, inhuman face, an expression she couldn't quite read, gone too quickly to interpret. "That," he said quietly, "is a conversation for later. For now you need medical attention, and I need to leave before too many questions are asked." "Wait," she said, grabbing his sleeve before he could vanish the way he'd appeared. The fabric was silk, she realized, finer than anything she'd ever touched. "I don't understand any of this. Vampires aren't real. People can't walk through fire, and you knew my name. You called me by my full name before I told you." "Vampires are very real, Miss Dawson," Vaelith interrupted, his red eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "We have simply become better at hiding. As for how I know you, why I was there, why I risked my life for yours." He paused, and for the first time, she saw something uncertain in his expression. "That is complicated." "Then uncomplicate it," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so harsh. "You're either very brave or very foolish," he said. "Most humans who learn of our existence spend their first moments in terror. You're demanding explanations." "I'm too tired to be terrified," Delilah said honestly, "and you saved my life. I figure that earns you the benefit of the doubt." He studied her for a long moment, his head tilted slightly to one side in a gesture that reminded her of a predator evaluating prey. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a card, actual heavy cardstock, ivory-colored and embossed with what looked like real gold lettering. "If you want answers," he said, pressing the card into her hand, "come to this address tomorrow night after sunset. Come alone, tell no one where you're going. And Delilah." He leaned closer, and she caught a scent like winter frost and old books and something dark and sweet she couldn't identify. "Do not try to research me or my kind on your human internet. The information you will find will be incorrect at best and dangerous at worst." Then he was gone, simply vanished between one blink and the next, leaving her standing in an alley holding a business card that read, "The Court of Shadows," and an address in the historic district, the part of the city where old mansions crumbled behind iron gates and no one went after dark. A paramedic found her a few minutes later, wrapped her in a shock blanket, started asking questions she answered on autopilot. Yes, she'd been on the 42nd floor. No, she wasn't sure how she'd gotten out. Everything was blurry, confusing. The smoke, you understand. Maybe she'd found a stairwell she didn't remember. Maybe someone had helped her. It was all so unclear. They treated her burns, gave her oxygen, told her how lucky she was. 11 people had died in the fire, they said. The top floors had been completely engulfed before the first trucks arrived. It was a miracle anyone from up there had survived. Delilah touched the card in her pocket and didn't correct them about the miracle part. That night, lying in her apartment with bandages on her arms and the smell of smoke still clinging to her hair despite 3 showers, she stared at the embossed lettering and tried to make sense of her new reality. Vampires existed. A vampire king had walked through fire to save her life, and tomorrow night, if she had any sense of self-preservation at all, she would throw this card away and pretend none of it had ever happened. Instead, she fell asleep planning what to wear to a vampire court. The address led to a mansion that looked like it had been transplanted directly from Gothic Europe and plunked down in the middle of the city's oldest neighborhood. The gate was wrought iron, twisted into patterns of roses and thorns, and it swung open silently as Delilah approached, as if something had been watching for her arrival. The walkway was lined with night-blooming flowers she couldn't identify, their white petals luminous in the darkness. The mansion itself was 3 stories of stone and stained glass, with towers that stretched toward the sky and windows that glowed with warm light despite the lateness of the hour. She'd worn her best dress, a simple black number that was appropriate for everything from funerals to fancy dinners. Now, looking at the grandeur before her, she felt hopelessly underdressed and completely out of her depth. The door opened before she could knock, revealing a woman with the same pale skin and white hair as Vaelith. Her eyes were violet instead of red, and she wore a gown that looked like it belonged in a museum, all velvet and lace and intricate beadwork. "Delilah Dawson," the woman said, her voice melodious and cold, "His Majesty is expecting you. Follow me and do not stray from the path I walk. There are protections in this house that do not look kindly on uninvited wandering." Delilah followed her through halls lined with paintings that had to be originals, past furniture that was definitely antique, under chandeliers that held real candles instead of electric lights. Other pale figures watched from doorways and balconies, all beautiful, all perfectly still, all studying her with expressions ranging from curiosity to hunger to outright hostility. "They can smell your humanity," the violet-eyed woman said without looking back. "It has been some time since a living mortal walked these halls without being intended as a meal." "That's reassuring," Delilah muttered, and was surprised to hear the woman laugh. "I am Isolde," she said, pausing before a set of double doors carved with more roses and thorns. "I have served the Qadir line for 400 years. In all that time, I have never seen our king risk himself for a human. You must be very special, Delilah Dawson, or very cursed. Perhaps both." Before Delilah could respond, the doors swung open, and she was ushered into a room that took her breath away. It was a library, but calling it that felt like calling the ocean a puddle. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, leather-bound volumes that smelled of age and knowledge. A fireplace large enough to stand in dominated one wall, flames dancing behind an ornate screen. Furniture was arranged in intimate groupings, chairs and sofas upholstered in rich fabrics, tables holding chess sets and globes and artifacts she couldn't identify. And in the center of it all, standing before the fireplace with his hands clasped behind his back, was Vaelith. He'd changed his suit for something even more formal, all black with subtle embroidery along the collar and cuffs. His white hair was pulled back from his face, revealing the perfect, inhuman beauty of his features. When he turned to look at her, his red eyes caught the firelight and glowed. "You came," he said, and she heard relief in his voice. "I was not certain you would." "You saved my life," Delilah said, stepping into the room as the doors closed behind her with a soft click. "I wanted to know why." Vaelith gestured to one of the chairs near the fire. "Sit. This explanation will take some time, and I would prefer you be comfortable for it." She sat, and he took the chair across from her, close enough that she could have reached out and touched him if she'd been brave enough. His hands, she noticed, were completely healed, the pale skin unmarked by any sign of the terrible burns she'd seen the night before. "What I'm about to tell you," he began, "is known to very few humans and no vampires outside my inner circle. I am trusting you with secrets that could destabilize the carefully maintained peace between our peoples. Do I have your word that what is said in this room will remain between us?" "You have it," Delilah said, leaning forward, "but I have questions, and I want real answers, not cryptic vampire riddles." A smile ghosted across his perfect features. "You are bold for a human, standing in the heart of a vampire court. Very well, ask your questions and I will answer them truthfully." She took a deep breath. "First question, how did you know I was in that building?" "I felt you dying," Vaelith said simply. "I felt your fear, your pain, your certainty that death was coming. It was like a knife to my chest, sudden and sharp and impossible to ignore. I was in the middle of negotiations with the Western Dominion when the sensation struck. I left immediately, tracked the feeling to its source, and found you. Delilah processed this. You felt me dying, from wherever you were, and you knew exactly where to find me. Yes. How is that possible? He was quiet for a long moment, his red eyes searching her face. Have you ever heard the term soul-bound, Miss Dawson? Her heart started beating faster. No. It is a phenomenon that occurs perhaps once in a millennium, he said carefully. When a vampire's soul recognizes its perfect complement in another being, it creates a connection that transcends distance, time, even death. The vampire becomes aware of their soul-bound's presence, their emotions, their jeopardy. It is said to be the most powerful magic our kind can experience. The room was very quiet, except for the crackling of the fire. Delilah stared at him, trying to understand what he was saying, why he was saying it, what it meant for her. You're saying I'm your soul-bound, she said slowly. You're saying your soul recognized mine. 3 months ago, Vaelith confirmed, I woke from my day sleep with the knowledge that my soul-bound had entered my territory. I felt you like a compass pointing north, a constant pull I could not ignore. I have been searching for you ever since, trying to find the human whose soul called to mine. And then yesterday, I felt you dying, and the thought of losing you before I'd even met you properly was... He stopped, his jaw tightening. Unacceptable. Delilah's mind was reeling. That's why you walked through fire. That's why you burned yourself saving me. Fire is one of the few things that can truly harm my kind, he said, holding up his hands, which had been so damaged the night before. It takes us weeks to heal from severe burns, months sometimes, and the pain is considerable. But the alternative was letting you die, and that was impossible. My soul would not allow it. I don't understand, she said, shaking her head. I'm nobody. I'm a data analyst who works too many hours and has a cat named Mr. Whiskers. Why would fate or magic or whatever decide that I'm supposed to be connected to a vampire king? Vaelith leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his red eyes intense on hers. That is the question I have been asking myself for 3 months, he said. I have ruled the Eastern Dominion for 5 centuries. I have fought wars, brokered peace treaties, outlived empires. I never expected to find a soul-bound, and I certainly never expected her to be human. But here we are, Delilah Dawson, bound together by forces neither of us can control or understand. She stood up abruptly, needing to move, needing to think. She walked to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens behind the mansion, trying to wrap her mind around everything she was learning. What happens now? She asked. What does this soul-bound thing mean for me? For us? She heard him stand, heard his footsteps as he crossed the room to stand behind her. He didn't touch her, but she could feel him there, could feel the coolness radiating from his body like a living thing. That depends on what you want, he said quietly. The bond does not force you to accept me or this connection. You have free will. You can walk away from this mansion tonight and never return. I will not force you to stay, will not compel you or manipulate you, or use any of the considerable powers at my disposal to bind you to me against your wishes. But, Delilah prompted, because she could hear the unspoken word hanging in the air. But I am asking you to stay, Vaelith said, and his voice had dropped to something softer, more vulnerable than she had heard from him yet. I'm asking you to give me time to show you what this connection could mean, to let me court you properly, by both human and vampire standards, to see if what our souls already know might grow into something your heart recognizes as well. She turned to face him, found him closer than she'd expected, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You're asking me to date you, she said. A vampire king is asking me to date him. I am asking for the chance to win your affection, he corrected, to prove that I am worthy of the gift fate has given me, and in return I offer you my protection, my resources, my loyalty. You will want for nothing, fear nothing, need nothing that I cannot provide. You will be safe, always, because I will allow no harm to come to my soulbound. It was crazy. It was impossible. It was the kind of thing that happened in movies and books and fever dreams. not to ordinary women who lived in studio apartments and took the bus to work. But she'd almost died yesterday, and she'd learned that the world was so much stranger and more magical than she'd ever imagined. And this beautiful, powerful, ancient creature was looking at her like she was precious, like she mattered, like she was worth walking through fire for. "I have conditions," Delilah heard herself say. Vaelith's expression shifted into something that might have been hope. "Name them." "First, I keep my job in my apartment. I'm not ready to give up my whole life, and I need to know I can support myself if this doesn't work out." He nodded. "Agreed." "Second, you answer all my questions about vampires, honestly and completely. No secrets, no lies, no, you're better off not knowing garbage. If I'm going to be involved in your world, I need to understand it." "Agreed," he said again. "Third, we take this slow. I don't care what our souls think they know. My brain and my heart need time to catch up. That means proper dates, actual conversations, getting to know each other like normal people, or as normal as a human and a vampire can be." "Of course," Vaelith said. "I would not rush you into anything. We have time." Delilah took a deep breath. "And fourth, if I decide this isn't what I want, if I choose to walk away, you let me go. No drama, no vampire vengeance, no tragic romance nonsense. You let me go and live my life." This time he hesitated, something pained flickering across his features, but finally he nodded. "If you decide you do not want this bond, I will release you from it. You have my word as king." She studied his face, searching for any sign of deception and finding none. "Okay," she said. "Okay, let's try this. Let's see what happens." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise, brilliant and warm and completely unexpected. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in both of his. His skin was cool but not unpleasant, and when he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture was so courtly and old-fashioned that she felt her cheeks heat. "Thank you," he said softly. "I swear to you, Delilah, I will do everything in my power to make you happy." "Let's start with a tour of this place," she said, trying to lighten the intensity of the moment. "And maybe some explanations about how vampire society works. Because if I'm going to be dating royalty, I should probably know the rules." Vaelith laughed, a genuine sound of joy that made something warm bloom in her chest. "Come," he said, tucking her hand into the crook of his elbow, like a gentleman from another era. "Let me introduce you to the Court of Shadows. And fair warning, they are going to be absolutely fascinated by you." He wasn't kidding. Over the next 2 weeks, Delilah found herself immersed in a world she'd never known existed, learning rules and customs that dated back millennia, meeting vampires who'd lived through history she'd only read about in textbooks. She learned that vampires didn't actually need to kill when they fed, that they had human donors who provided blood in exchange for payment and protection. She learned that sunlight didn't make them burst into flames, but caused intense pain and rapid deterioration that could be fatal if the exposure was prolonged. She learned that they could eat human food but derived no nourishment from it, that they could see in total darkness and hear a heartbeat from across a building, that they were vulnerable to fire and decapitation, but almost nothing else. She learned that vampire society was structured like a feudal court, with kings and queens ruling over dominions, with ancient laws governing everything from feeding rights to territorial disputes. Vaelith ruled the Eastern Dominion, which encompassed the eastern seaboard and parts of Canada. He was considered one of the most powerful vampires in North America, respected and feared in equal measure. And somehow, impossibly, he made time for her every single night. He took her to museums after hours, using his influence to arrange private tours where she could see priceless art without crowds of tourists. He took her to concerts, to plays, to restaurants so exclusive she'd never even heard of them. They walked through the city in the small hours of the morning when even the nightlife had gone quiet, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and hopes and fears. He told her about his mortal life in a country that no longer existed under a name he no longer used, about being turned during a war he'd been losing, about spending 5 centuries building the power and influence he now wielded. He told her about vampire politics, about the delicate balance of power between dominions, about the threats that lurked in the shadows, even deeper than the ones he ruled. She told him about growing up in foster care, about working 3 jobs to put herself through college, about building a quiet, stable life because stability was all she'd ever wanted. She told him about her dreams of traveling, of writing, of maybe someday having a family of her own. "I cannot give you children," Vaelith said one night as they sat in his library, her feet curled under her on the sofa while he sat in his usual chair. "Vampires cannot create life. If that is something you need—" "I said maybe someday," Delilah interrupted, setting down her wine glass. "And that was before I knew vampires existed, and my soul was apparently bound to one. I think I can adjust my expectations." He looked at her with such intensity that she felt it like a physical touch. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. "You have adapted to impossibilities that would have broken most humans. You walk through a vampire court like you belong there. You face creatures that could kill you with a thought, and you show no fear." "I'm terrified half the time," she admitted. "I'm just good at hiding it. And anyway, I'm not completely fearless. Some of your courtiers look at me like I'm a particularly interesting menu item." "They would not dare," Vaelith said. And there was steel in his voice now, the voice of a king who was accustomed to being obeyed. "I have made it abundantly clear that you are under my protection. Any vampire who harms you would face my personal wrath, and I have not survived 5 centuries by being merciful to those who defy me." It should have been frightening, that casual mention of violence, that reminder that he was a predator who'd killed and would kill again. Instead, Delilah found it reassuring. She was dating someone who could and would protect her from anything, who had literally walked through fire to keep her safe. "Tell me about the soul bond," she said, changing the subject. "You said you feel my emotions. What else can you feel?" Vaelith considered the question. "I always know where you are," he said. "I can sense your general emotional state, fear, joy, anger, sadness. If you are in danger, I feel it immediately and intensely. And—" he paused, something almost shy crossing his features. "I dream of you when I sleep during the day, dreams of moments we have not yet lived, conversations we have not yet had. It is said that soul-bound vampires dream their future with their chosen." "What do you dream?" Delilah asked, leaning forward. "Happiness," he said simply. "I dream you happy, laughing, safe. I dream you in this court, accepted and celebrated. I dream you in my arms, and I wake with the certainty that those dreams will become reality." Her heart was beating faster, and from the way his eyes tracked to her throat, she knew he could hear it. "Can I feel you the way you feel me?" she asked. "Not naturally," he said. "The bond is stronger from the vampire to the soulbound than the reverse. But there are ways, if you wanted, to strengthen your side of the connection. Blood magic, old rituals, nothing that would harm you or change you, but they would allow you to sense me as I sense you." "Would that make me less human?" she asked. "No," Vaelith said firmly. "You would remain mortal, remain human in every way. You would simply be more attuned to my presence, my state of being. Some soul-bound humans choose to do this. Others prefer to maintain their separation. The choice is entirely yours." Delilah thought about it, about being able to feel him the way he felt her, about having that constant connection. It should have felt invasive, claustrophobic. Instead, it felt like safety, like never being truly alone again. "I want to think about it," she said. "But I'm not saying no." He smiled. "Take all the time you need. We have nothing but time, you and I." Except they didn't, not really. Because 3 weeks after Delilah had walked into the Court of Shadows for the first time, the Western Dominion declared war. She was in Vaelith's study when the messenger arrived, a vampire who looked like he'd been through hell, his clothes torn and bloodied, his pale skin marked with burns that were healing too slowly. "Your Majesty," the messenger gasped, falling to one knee before Vaelith's desk. "The West has attacked our border territories. They've killed our sentries and burned our sanctuaries. Queen Cassandra demands you yield the eastern territories or face total war." Vaelith's expression went cold and hard, every trace of the man Delilah had been laughing with moments before, vanishing behind a mask of royal authority. "On what grounds does she make this demand?" She claims you have broken the Treaty of Shadows by harboring a human in your court, the messenger said, his eyes flicking to Delilah. She says that exposing our kind to a mortal without turning her or binding her is a violation punishable by forfeiture of territory. Delilah felt ice flood her veins. This is because of me, she said. She's using me as an excuse to start a war. Cassandra has wanted my territories for 2 centuries, Vaelith said, his voice leveled despite the rage she could see simmering in his red eyes. She is simply using you as a convenient justification. She would have found another reason eventually. But the treaty, Delilah said. Is she right? Have you broken vampire law by telling me about your kind? Vaelith stood, moving around the desk to stand before her. He took her hands in his, and she could feel the tension thrumming through his body despite his calm exterior. The Treaty of Shadows, he said carefully, states that humans who learn of vampire existence must either be turned, bound to secrecy through magical means, or killed to protect our secrecy. There is an exception for soul-bound humans, who are considered outside normal law due to the sacred nature of the bond, but that exception is old and rarely invoked. Cassandra is arguing that the exception does not apply, that I should have completed the bond through blood ritual or turned you, or, he stopped, his jaw tightening, or killed me, Delilah finished. She's saying you should have killed me to protect the secret. Which I would never do, Vaelith said fiercely. She knows that. Everyone knows that a vampire cannot harm their soulbound without destroying themselves in the process. But she is twisting the law to suit her purposes, and now I must respond. What happens if you go to war? Delilah asked. Vaelith's grip on her hands tightened. War between dominions is catastrophic, he said. Vampires are difficult to kill, which means battles are prolonged and brutal. Territories are devastated. Humans caught in the crossfire are slaughtered. And if I lose, if Cassandra defeats me, she will take these lands and everyone in them will fall under her rule. She is not kind, Delilah. She is not just. She treats humans as cattle and vampires as pawns in her games of power. Delilah's mind was racing, trying to find a solution, trying to see a way out of this that didn't end in bloodshed and destruction. What if I do the blood ritual? She asked. What if I complete the bond? Would that satisfy the law? It would, Vaelith admitted. But Delilah, the blood ritual is not something to be undertaken lightly. It would bind us together permanently, strengthen the connection between us tenfold. You would feel everything I feel, experience echoes of my memories, my thoughts. It would not make you vampire, but it would make you forever other than fully human. And once done, it cannot be undone. But it would prevent the war, she said. Perhaps, Vaelith said, or perhaps Cassandra would simply find another justification for her ambitions. I will not pressure you into this, Delilah. I will not allow you to sacrifice your humanity to solve a problem that is ultimately mine to handle. She looked up at him, at this ancient king who'd walked through fire for her, who'd shown her gentleness and patience and genuine care, despite being a creature of darkness and blood. She thought about the dreams he had of their future, about the way her heart had started beating faster whenever he was near, about how her quiet, stable life suddenly felt empty on the nights when she wasn't with him. What if I want to do it? She asked. Not to prevent a war, not to satisfy some ancient law, but because I want to be bound to you the way you're bound to me? What if I'm tired of feeling this connection one way, of knowing you can sense me while I'm blind to you? What if I want all of it, Vaelith, the bond and the connection and whatever comes with choosing you? His eyes widened, something vulnerable and hopeful breaking through his kingly composure. You would choose this? Choose me? Knowing what it means, what you would sacrifice? I'm choosing us, Delilah corrected. I'm choosing what we could be together. And yes, I'm terrified. And yes, this is happening faster than I planned. But when has anything about us gone according to plan? You literally saved me from a fire 3 weeks ago. I think we passed taking it slow, somewhere around the second private museum tour. A sound escaped him, half laugh and half sob, and then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt his face pressed into her hair, felt the trembling in his body that betrayed just how much control he'd been maintaining, how much fear he'd been hiding behind his royal mask. I love you, he said, the words muffled against her hair. I know it is too soon. I know you may not feel the same, But I need you to know before we do this that I love you, Delilah Dawson. I love your courage and your curiosity and your stubborn refusal to be intimidated by things that should terrify you. I love the way you argue with me about vampire politics and the way you laugh at my stories about historical events you've only read about. I love you, and I will spend the rest of your mortal life proving that you made the right choice in choosing me. Delilah pulled back enough to look up at him, reaching up to touch his face, his perfect, inhuman, beautiful face. I think I love you too, she said. I think I started loving you the moment you walked through fire for me, and I've just been catching up to what my soul already knew. He kissed her then, careful and gentle despite the passion she could feel thrumming through him. His lips were cool against hers, and she tasted something sweet and dark and addictive. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, her from necessity, him from emotion rather than need. We will do the ritual tonight, Vaelith said, his forehead pressed to hers. And then I will send word to Cassandra that the bond is complete, that you are mine, and I am yours in every way the old laws recognize. And if she still wants war after that, then we will give her war, and she will learn why I have held these territories for 5 centuries. The ritual took place in a chamber deep beneath the mansion, in a room carved from stone that predated the city above it. Candles burned in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows on walls covered in symbols Delilah didn't recognize. The air smelled of incense and old magic, making her skin prickle with awareness. Isolde was there, along with 2 other elder vampires, Vaelith introduced as his most trusted advisors. They would witness the ritual, he explained, so that no one could question its validity or completion. It will hurt, Vaelith warned her as they stood in the center of a circle painted on the floor in what looked like silver. Not terribly, but there will be pain as the magic binds us, and you will feel me completely for the first time, feel 5 centuries of memories and emotions flooding into you all at once. It will be overwhelming. I trust you, Delilah said simply. I trust you to guide me through it. He took her hands, positioning them palm to palm, and began speaking in a language she didn't understand, words that felt old and powerful and sacred. The air around them began to shimmer, and she felt something building, like pressure before a storm. Then Vaelith drew a small blade from his belt and cut his palm, blood welling up red and impossibly bright against his pale skin. He held out his hand to her, and she understood what he was asking. She'd never been good with pain, had always been the person who looked away when getting blood drawn at the doctor's office. But she held out her hand steadily and didn't flinch when the blade sliced across her palm, sharp and quick and burning. Vaelith pressed their bleeding palms together, his blood mixing with hers, and the world exploded into sensation. She felt him pour into her mind, into her soul, a flood of memories and emotions that was exactly as overwhelming as he'd warned. She saw battles fought in armor and chainmail, saw courts lit by torches instead of electric lights, saw the faces of people long dead and kingdoms long fallen. She felt his loneliness, centuries of it, the weight of ruling without ever finding someone who understood the burden. She felt his fear when he'd sensed her dying, felt the decision he'd made without hesitation to risk his life for hers. And underneath it all, threading through every memory and emotion, she felt his love for her, powerful and absolute and unwavering. It was like standing in the sun after a lifetime in shadow, like coming home after an endless journey. It filled all the empty places inside her she hadn't known existed, all the loneliness she'd carried since childhood, all the fears that she'd never be important to anyone, never matter, never be enough. She was enough. She was everything. She was his, and he was hers, and nothing in heaven or hell could break what they were forging in this moment. The magic sealed with a flash of light that left her blinded and gasping. When her vision cleared, she was on her knees with Vaelith's arms around her, his voice murmuring reassurances in that old language, while she trembled and tried to process what had just happened to her. "I've got you," he said, switching back to English. "You are safe, you are whole, you are mine. Breathe, beloved. Just breathe." Delilah drew in a shuddering breath and felt him inside her mind, a constant warm presence that had not been there before. She could feel his relief, his joy, his love wrapping around her like a blanket. And beneath that, she could feel his awareness of the chamber, of the witnesses, of the city above and the territories beyond that he ruled and protected. "I can feel you," she whispered. "Oh God, Vaelith, I can feel everything." "It will settle," he promised, helping her to her feet. "Right now the bond is new and raw, and you are feeling too much too strongly. In a few days, you will learn to control it, to pull back when you need privacy and open yourself when you want connection. I will teach you." She nodded, still clinging to him, still trying to adjust to this new reality where she was never truly alone, where part of him lived inside her as surely as her own heartbeat. Isolde stepped forward, a small smile on her usually stern face. "The bond is complete," she said formally. "Witnessed and sealed according to the old laws. Delilah Dawson is now soulbound to His Majesty Vaelith Qadir, recognized as his consort by all the laws of our kind. May the bond bring strength to you both." The other vampires echoed her words, and Delilah realized this was more than just a magical ritual. This was a political statement, a declaration that she was under the protection of the Vampire King, that she was part of his court and his power structure. Anyone who wanted to harm her would have to go through him first. "Come," Vaelith said gently, guiding her toward the door. "You need rest, and I need to send word to Cassandra before she does something we will all regret." He took her to his private chambers, a suite of rooms she'd never seen before, decorated in rich fabrics and dark woods that spoke of wealth and power. He settled her in a chair by the fireplace, wrapped her in a blanket despite the fact that she wasn't cold, and pressed a glass of water into her hands. "Drink," he commanded. "The ritual takes a toll on the body and you need to stay hydrated." She obeyed, and while she drank, she watched him move to a desk and begin writing on parchment with actual ink and a quill. His handwriting was elegant and old-fashioned, full of flourishes she could barely read. What are you telling her?" Delilah asked. "That the bond is complete, that your presence in my court is now sanctioned by the oldest laws of our kind," Vaelith said without looking up. "That if she wishes to contest this, she may bring her grievance before the Council of Kings, where I will be happy to defend my actions and my right to my soulbound, and that if she attacks my territories again, I will consider it an act of war and respond accordingly." "Will she back down?" Delilah asked. "I do not know," Vaelith admitted. "Cassandra is ambitious and ruthless, but she is not stupid. War with me would be costly even if she won. And now that you are officially bonded to me, she has no legal grounds to challenge my harboring of a human. She may decide the risk is not worth the potential reward." "And if she doesn't?" He finally looked up, his red eyes meeting hers across the room. "Then I will protect what is mine," he said simply. "I will protect you, and my people, and my territories, with every resource at my disposal. And if that means war, then so be it." Delilah set down her water glass and stood, crossing to where he sat. She could feel his tension through the bond, could sense the weight of responsibility he carried, the fear he wouldn't let himself show. She rested her hands on his shoulders, and he leaned back into her touch with a sigh. "We'll face it together," she said. "Whatever comes, we face it together. That's what the bond means, right?" "Yes," Vaelith said, reaching up to cover one of her hands with his. "That is exactly what it means." Cassandra's response arrived the next evening, delivered by a vampire messenger who looked terrified to be standing in Vaelith's court. The letter was brief and formal, acknowledging the completion of the bond and withdrawing her challenge to Delilah's presence. But it ended with a threat thinly veiled as a promise. "The Eastern Dominion grows weak if its king is distracted by mortal concerns. Other rulers are watching Vaelith, other rulers are waiting." "She is going to be a problem," Isolde said after the messenger had been dismissed. "She is backed down for now, but she will look for other ways to undermine your power, other excuses to challenge your rule." "Let her look," Vaelith said, though Delilah could feel the worry thrumming through him via the bond. "I have held these territories against greater threats than Cassandra's ambition. I will not be cowed by her posturing." But the threats kept coming, subtle and not so subtle. Vampires loyal to Cassandra began spreading rumors throughout the supernatural community that Vaelith had grown soft, that his attachment to a human made him weak, that he was neglecting his duties as king in favor of playing house with a mortal pet. Delilah heard the whispers even in the halls of Vaelith's own mansion, saw the look some of the younger vampires gave her, mixtures of contempt and curiosity and barely veiled hunger. She felt Vaelith's protective fury every time someone stepped out of line, every time someone dared suggest she was a liability rather than an asset. "They do not understand," he said one night after banishing a vampire who'd made a particularly crude comment about Delilah's mortality. "They do not understand what the soul bond means, what you mean. They see a human and assume weakness, when in fact you have made me stronger than I have been in centuries." "How do I make you stronger?" Delilah asked. "I'm not a warrior. I can't fight in your battles. I can't even walk in sunlight without you, since you're vulnerable during the day and you've assigned bodyguards to follow me everywhere." Vaelith pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. "You make me stronger because you give me something worth protecting beyond territory and power," he said. "You make me stronger because you remind me what it means to be more than just a king. You make me stronger because when I feel your presence through the bond, when I sense your love and your trust, I remember why I have fought for 5 centuries to build something good in a world of darkness." She tilted her head back to look up at him. "That's very poetic," she said. "But I want to actually help, not just be a symbol or an inspiration. Teach me about vampire politics. Let me sit in on your council meetings. I'm good at analyzing data and finding patterns. Maybe I can see things your vampires miss because they're too close to it." He studied her face, and she felt surprise ripple through the bond, followed by consideration. "You wish to be part of my rule," he said slowly. "Not just my consort, but my partner in leadership." "Is that allowed?" Delilah asked. "I mean, I know I'm mortal and new to all this, but if I'm going to be part of your court, I want to actually contribute, not just sit around looking decorative." A smile spread across Vaelith's face, genuine and delighted. "It is rare," he said, but not unheard of. There have been mortal consorts throughout history who acted as advisors to their vampire partners. And you are right, you might see angles we miss, precisely because you think like a human rather than a centuries-old predator. Very well. Tomorrow night, you sit in on the council meeting. But fair warning, beloved vampire politics are Byzantine in their complexity and often brutal in their execution. I once had to explain blockchain technology to a room full of executives who thought the cloud meant weather, Delilah said dryly. I think I can handle your vampire drama. He laughed, and the sound filled her with warmth through the bond. I adore you, he said. Have I mentioned that recently? Not in the last 5 minutes, she teased. You're slacking. The council meeting was exactly as complex and brutal as Vaelith had warned. Delilah sat beside his throne, an actual throne, ornate and ancient, and listened to reports from vampires across the Eastern Dominion, territorial disputes, feeding rights, conflicts with other supernatural beings, threats from vampire hunters, concerns about exposure in the age of social media and smartphones. And through it all, she noticed patterns. Vampires reporting issues in territories near the border with the Western Dominion. Small provocations, minor conflicts, nothing major enough to justify a declaration of war, but collectively adding up to something that looked suspiciously like preparation for one. She is testing your defenses, Delilah said after the council had concluded and they were alone. Cassandra, these border incidents aren't random. Look. She pulled out her phone, where she'd been taking notes, and showed Vaelith a map she'd created. Every incident in the last month has been within 50 miles of the border. She's probing, seeing where you are strong and where you are weak, looking for the best place to strike if she decides to attack. Vaelith stared at the map, his expression growing darker. You saw this pattern from one meeting, he said. My advisors have been looking at these incidents individually for weeks and missed the larger picture. Fresh eyes, Delilah said with a shrug. And I'm used to looking at data sets for patterns. That's literally my job. Or was my job before I started dating a vampire king and attending council meetings instead of analyzing spreadsheets. You are keeping your job, Vaelith reminded her. You were quite clear about that condition. I've been taking a lot of sick days lately, Delilah admitted. Pretty sure my boss thinks I have some kind of chronic illness, which I guess I do now, if you count being soul-bound to a vampire as a chronic condition. He pulled her close, and she felt affection and amusement and love flowing through the bond. "What would you recommend?" he asked. "Based on your analysis, how should we respond to Cassandra's probing?" Delilah thought about it. "Reinforce the weak points," she said. "Make sure she knows you see what she is doing, and maybe reach out to the other Dominion leaders. If Cassandra is planning something, she will need allies, or at least assurances that the others will not interfere. If you shore up your alliances, you make it harder for her to move against you." "You think like a general," Vaelith said, something like pride in his voice. "Strategic, forward-thinking." "You are right. I will send envoys to the northern and southern dominions, remind them of old alliances and mutual interests, and I will make sure Cassandra knows we have reinforced our borders." "Will that be enough?" Delilah asked. "I do not know," Vaelith said honestly, "but it is better than waiting for her to strike at a moment of her choosing. You have given me an advantage, beloved. You have given me intelligence I did not have before." Over the next few weeks, Delilah found her place in the Court of Shadows. She attended council meetings and offered insights, helped Vaelith navigate diplomatic correspondence, and slowly won over some of the vampires who'd been skeptical of her presence. She learned vampire etiquette, studied their history, even started taking self-defense lessons from Isolde, who turned out to be a terrifying but effective teacher. "You are mortal," Isolde said during one particularly brutal training session, "which means you will always be at a disadvantage in a physical confrontation with a vampire. But if you know where we are vulnerable, if you understand how we move and fight, you can survive long enough for help to arrive." "Meaning I can survive long enough for Vaelith to show up and murder whoever attacked me?" Delilah asked, rubbing her bruised ribs. "Precisely," Isolde said with a grin that showed her fangs. "His Majesty is extremely protective of you. Any vampire foolish enough to harm you would face his wrath, and he is not known for his mercy to those who threaten what he loves." It should have bothered her, that casual mention of violence, that acceptance that Vaelith would kill to protect her. Instead, Delilah found it comforting. She was living in a world of predators now, a world where strength and power were the currencies that mattered. Knowing she had the strongest predator of all standing between her and any threat made it possible to sleep at night. She was getting used to the bond too, learning to control the constant flow of emotion and sensation between them. She could pull back when she needed privacy, could shield her thoughts when she wanted to surprise him. But mostly, she left the connection open, finding comfort in the constant awareness of his presence, his love, his steadfast protection. He'd started sleeping in her apartment on nights when he couldn't be at the mansion, bringing his day sleep coffin, which was apparently not actually a coffin but a custom-designed bed in a windowless room, and setting it up in her bedroom. She'd wake up in the afternoon to find him already awake and watching her with those red eyes, a small smile on his perfect face. "Creepy much?" she'd teased the first time. "I like watching you sleep," he'd replied without shame. "You are peaceful and sleep content. It fills me with joy to know you feel safe enough in my presence to be so vulnerable." It was weird and romantic, and somehow perfectly Vaelith, mixing old-world courtliness with predatory intensity in a way that made her heart race. Things were good. They were building something real, something lasting. Delilah had even started thinking about the future, about what it would mean to spend her mortal life with an immortal partner, about whether she might want to be turned eventually, about the family they could build within the Court of Shadows, even if they couldn't have children. And then Cassandra struck. It happened on a night when Vaelith was meeting with envoys from the Northern Dominion, a crucial negotiation that Delilah had helped arrange. She'd stayed at her apartment, catching up on actual work for her actual job, trying to maintain some semblance of her human life. The attack came fast and brutal. Vampires burst through her door that had been reinforced and warded after the soul bond, her door that should have been impenetrable to anyone not explicitly invited inside. But they came anyway. 6 of them with faces she didn't recognize, moving with the terrible speed of their kind. Delilah's bodyguards fought, 2 vampires Vaelith had assigned to watch her building. She heard them screaming, heard the sounds of combat, and then one of the attackers was in her apartment, grabbing her before she could run. "The Vampire King's pet," the attacker said, his accent different from the eastern vampires she knew. Western Dominion, she realized with terror. Queen Cassandra sends her regards." He moved to bite her, fangs extending, and Delilah did what Isolde had taught her. She went for the eyes, fingers clawed, fighting with everything she had. He snarled and backhanded her, sending her flying across the room to crash into the wall. Through the bond, she felt Vaelith's awareness spike, felt his absolute terror and rage as he sensed her danger. She tried to send him reassurance, tried to tell him she was fighting, but then there were hands on her again, dragging her toward the window. They were going to take her. They were going to kidnap her and use her against Vaelith, and she couldn't let that happen, couldn't let herself become a weapon against the man she loved. So she did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed a lamp from the table and smashed it into her attacker's face with all her strength, then threw herself toward the kitchen where she kept a knife block. If she was going down, she was going down fighting. She never made it. A vampire intercepted her, lifted her by the throat, and everything started going dark around the edges. She heard more fighting, heard her bodyguard still trying to reach her, heard the attacker say something about a car waiting downstairs, and then the wall exploded inward. Vaelith came through it like an avenging angel, eyes blazing with fury, moving faster than she'd ever seen him move. He ripped the vampire holding her away from her body, literally tore him apart with his bare hands, sending pieces flying across her apartment. Then, he was moving through the other attackers like death incarnate, savage and brutal and absolutely terrifying. It was over in seconds. 6 vampires lay dead or dying around her apartment, and Vaelith was pulling her into his arms, his hands running over her body checking for injuries, his voice a litany of reassurances and apologies and promises of vengeance. "I am sorry," he said over and over. "I am so sorry, beloved. I should have protected you better. I should have anticipated this. I will kill Cassandra for this. I will burn her entire dominion to ash. I'm okay," Delilah interrupted, wrapping her arms around him even though she was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "I'm okay. You got here. I'm alive." "You are bleeding," he said, touching her face where the vampire had struck her. "You are hurt, and it is my fault." "It's Cassandra's fault," Delilah corrected. "And Vaelith, they got through the wards. They came into my apartment even though they weren't invited. How is that possible?" His face went even harder, if that was possible. "Blood magic," he said grimly. "Old, expensive, difficult blood magic. Cassandra spent resources on this attack, which means she is committed, which means this will not stop until one of us is dead." Isolde appeared in the doorway, taking in the carnage with a grim expression. "The building is secure," she reported. "But, Your Majesty, we need to move Miss Dawson immediately. If Cassandra is willing to attack her here, she will try again." "Take her to the vault," Vaelith commanded. "The deepest chamber, the one with the strongest protections. No one enters except me and those I explicitly authorize. And send word I am calling a council of war. Every vampire loyal to me, every ally in the other dominions. Cassandra has made this personal, and I will show her what it means to threaten what belongs to the Vampire King." Delilah was taken to a chamber deep beneath the mansion, a room carved from solid stone and covered in symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. It was comfortable enough, furnished with a bed and chairs and even a small bathroom, but it was also very clearly a prison. A luxurious prison meant to keep her safe, but a prison nonetheless. Vaelith visited her every few hours, between meetings and planning sessions and whatever else he was doing to prepare for war. Each time he came, she felt his guilt and rage through the bond, felt how much it was eating at him that she'd been hurt because of him. "This is not your fault," she told him for the 100th time. "Stop blaming yourself for Cassandra's actions." "I brought you into this world," he said, sitting beside her on the bed, taking her hands in his. "I bound you to me knowing the dangers, knowing that my enemies would see you as a vulnerability to exploit. And I was right, they did see you that way. And now you are locked in a vault because it is not safe for you to live your own life." "So we make it safe," Delilah said. "We end this with Cassandra, permanently, so she can't threaten us anymore." "You speak of war so casually," Vaelith said, something sad in his voice. "You have become harder than the woman I pulled from that fire." "I've become stronger," Delilah corrected. "There's a difference. And yes, I know what I'm suggesting. I know it means vampires will die, that there will be violence and destruction. But Vaelith, she tried to kidnap me. She sent vampires to drag me away from everything I know, To use me as a hostage or a weapon or whatever she had planned. That's not going to stop unless you stop her. He pulled her close, and she felt his love and fear and determination through the bond. I will end this, he promised. I will end her, and you will be safe again, I swear it. The war, when it came, was brutal and brief. Vaelith called in old alliances, reminded other Dominion leaders that if Cassandra was willing to attack a soul-bound consort, no one's people were safe. The Northern Dominion pledged support, and the Southern Dominion agreed to remain neutral, which meant Cassandra couldn't count on reinforcements. Delilah watched from the vault through the bond, feeling echoes of the battles Vaelith fought, feeling his cold fury and deadly precision as he led his vampires against Cassandra's forces. She felt when he cornered Cassandra herself, felt the confrontation between two ancient powers, felt the moment he drove a stake through her heart and set her body burning. And then he was back, standing in the doorway of the vault, covered in blood that wasn't his, eyes still blazing with the aftermath of battle. It is done, he said. Cassandra is dead, her loyalists scattered. The Western Dominion is in chaos, but they will not threaten us again. You are safe now, beloved. You are safe. Delilah ran to him, uncaring about the blood, uncaring about anything except that he was alive and whole and victorious. He caught her in his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt the tension finally draining out of him through the bond. Take me home, she said. Not the vault, not the safe room. Take me to our chambers, to our bed. I want to feel alive again. He did, carrying her through the mansion that was celebrating victory, past vampires who cheered their king and the consort he'd gone to war to protect. He took her to their rooms now, not just his, and laid her gently on the bed. I love you, he said, kneeling beside the bed, his bloody hands careful on her face. I love you more than territory or power or my own immortal life. You are everything to me, Delilah Dawson. You are my soul-bound, my consort, my reason for existing. And I will never again allow anyone to threaten you. I know, she said, pulling him down to kiss her. I feel it through the bond, remember? I feel everything you feel, and I know exactly how much you love me. And I love you just as much, Vaelith Qadir, my vampire king, my savior, my soul-bound. They made love that night for the first time, careful and intense and full of the knowledge that they'd fought for this, earned this, survived war and fire and political machinations to be together. His cool skin against her warm flesh, his careful control ensuring he never hurt her despite his strength, her trust absolute as she gave herself to a creature that could kill her with a thought, but instead worshipped her like something precious. Afterwards, lying in his arms while he traced patterns on her skin, Delilah felt complete in a way she never had before. The bond hummed between them, satisfied and content, two souls perfectly aligned. What happens now? She asked. What's next for us? Now, Vaelith said, we rebuild. The Western Dominion needs a new leader, and I will help establish someone reasonable who will honor the old treaties. My own territories need reassurance that the war is truly over. And you, my beloved, need to decide what you want your role to be moving forward. Do you wish to remain mortal? Or would you consider the transformation, joining me in immortality? Delilah had been thinking about this question since the attack, since she'd felt how fragile her human life was compared to the forces arrayed against them. I want to wait, she said finally. I want a few more years of humanity, of experiencing things the way humans do. But someday, yes, someday I want you to turn me, so we can have forever together instead of just my mortal lifetime. Someday, Vaelith agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. But for now, I am content to have you exactly as you are, my brave, brilliant, mortal soul-bound. 6 months later, Delilah stood in the grand hall of the Court of Shadows, wearing a gown that cost more than her old car and probably her college education combined. Vampires from all over North America had gathered for the ceremony, along with representatives from other supernatural communities, werewolves and witches and beings she didn't have names for yet. Vaelith stood beside her in formal court dress, his white hair braided with silver thread, his red eyes warm as he looked down at her. Isolde stood before them, a leather-bound book in her hands, reading words in that old language that meant Delilah was being formally recognized as Queen Consort of the Eastern Dominion. It was political theater, a necessary formality to cement her position and make clear to anyone still harboring doubts that she was under the protection of the strongest vampire in the region. But it was also real, a genuine commitment between her and Vaelith, witnessed by their people and sealed by ancient magic. When Isolde finished reading, Vaelith turned to Delilah and took both her hands in his. "Before our people and the powers that watch over us," he said, his voice carrying through the hall, "I claim Delilah Dawson as my soulbound, my consort, my queen. I pledge to her my protection, my loyalty, my love, for as long as she draws breath and beyond. Let any who would challenge this claim face me and face the consequences." The threat was clear and absolute, and the assembled vampires roared their approval. Delilah felt the weight of their recognition, felt the magical bonds settling around her like a cloak of power. She was protected now, not just by Vaelith personally, but by the entire structure of vampire law and society. "I accept," she said clearly, the words she'd practiced and memorized. "I claim Vaelith Qadir as my soulbound, my king, my partner. I pledge to him my trust, my counsel, my love for as long as I draw breath and beyond. I stand with him in darkness and in light, in peace and in war, now and always." Vaelith smiled, brilliant and genuine, and pulled her into a kiss that was probably too intimate for a formal ceremony, but which the assembled vampires cheered anyway. Through the bond, she felt his absolute joy, his pride, his love flowing into her like sunlight. When they finally broke apart, he kept her hand in his as they turned to face the crowd. "My queen," he said, gesturing to Delilah, "my soulbound, my everything." The crowd roared again, and Delilah felt tears prick her eyes because this was real. This was her life now, this impossible, magical, dangerous, beautiful life she'd never imagined when she'd been trapped in a burning building 6 months ago. "I love you," she said to Vaelith through the bond, the words just for him. "I love you," he replied the same way. "My brave queen. Thank you for choosing me, for choosing this. I will spend eternity proving I am worthy of that choice." The celebration lasted until dawn forced the vampires to seek shelter, and Delilah found herself holding court alongside Vaelith, accepting congratulations and well-wishes from beings that still occasionally terrified her. But she smiled and played her role, and felt Vaelith's pride in her through the bond. When the last guests had finally departed and they were alone in their chambers, Vaelith pulled her close and just held her, swaying slightly to music only they could hear. "Happy?" he asked. "Deliriously," Delilah said. "Exhausted and my feet hurt from those shoes, but deliriously happy." He laughed and swept her up in his arms, carrying her to their bed. "Then let me take care of you," he said. "Let me show you how grateful I am for this perfect, impossible gift I've been given." Years passed, mortal years that felt both endless and too brief. Delilah continued working her human job for a while before the impossibility of maintaining both lives became too much, and she transitioned to working full-time as Vaelith's partner in ruling the Eastern Dominion. She discovered she had a talent for diplomacy, for finding compromise solutions that satisfied both vampire and human needs. She helped establish better feeding protocols that protected human donors, helped negotiate treaties with other supernatural communities, helped modernize the ancient vampire court system for the 21st century. And through it all, Vaelith stood beside her, supporting her innovations, trusting her judgment, loving her with an intensity that never diminished. They traveled together, visiting other dominions, seeing parts of the world Delilah had only dreamed about. They walked through ancient castles where Vaelith had once lived, visited battlefields where he'd fought, met vampires he'd known for centuries. And he introduced her to all of it with such pride, such joy in sharing his long history with the one person who could truly understand it. On her 30th birthday, Delilah woke to find Vaelith watching her sleep as he often did, but this time with something different in his expression, something uncertain, almost nervous. "What's wrong?" she asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing is wrong," he said. I have a question to ask you, and I find myself unexpectedly anxious about your answer." Delilah sat up, pulling the blankets around her. "Ask me." He took her hands in his, and she felt his vulnerability through the bond. the genuine fear that she might say no to whatever he was about to propose. "You once said you wanted a few more years of humanity," he began. "It has been 7 years since I pulled you from that fire, 7 years since we bonded, and I find myself increasingly aware of your mortality, of the years passing, of the fact that you will age and I will not. So I am asking, beloved, if you are ready. If you would consider accepting the transformation, becoming vampire, spending not just your mortal life with me, but eternity." Delilah had known this conversation was coming, had been thinking about it more and more lately. She thought about what she would lose: the sunlight, the ability to have children, certain human experiences she could never recapture. But then she thought about what she would gain forever with Vaelith, the strength to truly stand beside him as an equal, the time to do everything they'd dreamed about together. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready. Turn me." The transformation took 3 days of agony that Delilah barely remembered afterwards, her body dying and being reborn into something new. Vaelith never left her side, feeding her his blood, using the bond to anchor her to consciousness, guiding her through the death of her humanity and the birth of her vampire self. When she finally woke on the 3rd night, the world had changed. Everything was sharper, clearer, more vivid than it had ever been as a human. She could hear conversations happening in other parts of the mansion, could smell the complex scents of vampire and human and magic that permeated the building, could see in the darkness as clearly as if it were day. And Vaelith, standing beside her bed with an expression of wonder on his perfect face, looked more beautiful than she'd ever seen him. The bond between them had intensified, no longer constrained by her mortal limitations, and she felt him with absolute clarity, every emotion, every thought he chose to share, every ounce of love he felt for her. "Welcome to immortality," he said softly. "Welcome to forever, my queen." Delilah stood, moving with the supernatural grace of her new body, and crossed to where he stood. She took his face in her hands, marveling at the fact that his skin no longer felt cool to her, that they were the same temperature now, the same species, truly matched. "Forever," she agreed. "That sounds perfect." They had centuries ahead of them, millennia perhaps. Time to travel every corner of the world, time to watch civilizations rise and fall, time to build something lasting and beautiful in the court of shadows, time to love each other without the shadow of mortality hanging over them. Delilah thought back to the woman she'd been, trapped in a burning building and certain she was going to die. That woman would never have believed this future was possible, would never have imagined that her salvation would come in the form of a vampire king who walked through fire for her. But here she was, transformed and powerful and loved beyond measure. Here she was, standing beside the man who'd saved her life and then helped her build a new one. Here she was, queen of a vampire court, soul-bound to an immortal king, ready to face whatever eternity brought. "I love you," she said to Vaelith, the words she would have forever to repeat, forever to mean, forever to live. "I love you," he replied, pulling her close. "My soul-bound, my queen, my eternal companion. Thank you for surviving that fire, for trusting me, for choosing this life we built together." "Best decision I ever made," Delilah said with a grin that showed her new fangs. "Definitely worth almost dying for." He laughed and kissed her, and through the bond she felt his absolute happiness, his complete contentment, his certainty that they had forever ahead of them, and it still wouldn't be enough time to love her as thoroughly as she deserved. Outside their chambers, the Court of Shadows continued its eternal business. Vampires going about their nightly activities, humans under protection sleeping safely, the carefully balanced world they'd built together, thriving under their joint leadership. Inside, two soul-bound vampires held each other and planned their forever, grateful for the fire that had brought them together and the love that would keep them together through all the centuries to come. The vampire king had walked through fire for her, and she had chosen to walk through death for him. And now, neither of them would ever be alone again. They had each other, had their bond, had the absolute certainty that whatever challenges eternity brought, they would face them together. It was, Delilah thought, as Vaelith carried her back to their bed, the perfect ending, or rather, the perfect beginning to their eternal story.